The three black SUVs cut through the Nebraska dawn like shadows against the golden wheat fields, their tinted windows reflecting nothing but the endless prairie sky. Tom Bradley stood frozen on his front porch, coffee mug halfway to his lips, watching as the convoy pulled into his gravel driveway with military precision. Just 12 hours ago, he'd been a simple corn farmer battling the worst thunderstorm in decades. Now, federal agents in dark suits were stepping out of vehicles bearing government plates, their earpieces and stern expressions suggesting this was no ordinary morning visit. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started like countless others for Tom Bradley, with the familiar creaking of floorboards in the 100-year-old farmhouse that had been in his family for 4 generations. At 62, Tom's weathered hands and sun-lined face told the story of a lifetime spent working the land, but his eyes still held the quiet strength that had carried him through drought seasons, market crashes, and the devastating loss of his wife, Grace, 5 years prior. The kitchen clock, a wedding gift from Grace's mother, ticked steadily as Tom poured his first cup of coffee from the same blue enamel pot he'd used every morning for 3 decades. Duke, his aging German shepherd, lifted his graying muzzle from his bed near the wood stove, offering a soft whine that Tom had learned to interpret as concern about the approaching weather. The dog's arthritis always acted up before storms, a more reliable forecast than any meteorologist could provide. Tom scratched behind Duke's ears, noting how the fur had gone white around the dog's face, mirroring his own transformation over the years. The radio crackled with static as the Weather Service issued yet another update about the massive storm system bearing down on eastern Nebraska. Tom listened while buttering a piece of toast, his movements automatic after decades of the same routine. The announcer's voice carried an unusual urgency as she described the convergence of weather patterns that meteorologists were calling a once-in-a-century event. Outside the kitchen window, Tom could see his cornfields stretching toward the horizon, the stalks heavy with the season's harvest. September had been kind this year, with just enough rain and plenty of sunshine to produce what looked to be his best crop in a decade. The soybeans in the south field were equally promising, their pods full and ready for combining. But all of that could change in an instant if this storm lived up to its billing. Tom's son, Michael, had called the previous evening from Seattle, where he worked as a software engineer for one of those tech companies Tom couldn't quite keep straight. The conversation had followed their usual pattern, Michael expressing concern about his father living alone on the farm, Tom deflecting with updates about the harvest and local gossip. Neither mentioned Grace, though her absence hung between them like morning mist over the fields. The distance between father and son wasn't just geographical. Michael had left Willow Creek the day after his high school graduation, eager to escape what he saw as the limitations of small-town life. Tom understood, even if it pained him. The boy had inherited his mother's quick mind and restless spirit, qualities that couldn't be contained by county lines and crop rotations. Their weekly phone calls had become a ritual of careful conversation, dancing around deeper feelings and unspoken regrets. As Tom finished his breakfast, he ran through his mental checklist of storm preparations. The generator needed fuel, the barn doors required extra securing, and the drainage ditches along the property line should be cleared of debris. Living alone meant every task fell to him, a reality he'd grown accustomed to but never truly comfortable with. Grace had been his partner in every sense, her organizational skills complementing his practical knowledge. Together, they'd weathered countless storms, both literal and metaphorical. The first rumble of thunder rolled across the prairie as Tom stepped onto the porch, Duke following stiffly behind. The western sky had taken on an ominous green tinge, a color that any longtime resident of Tornado Alley recognized as trouble. The wind had picked up, sending dust devils dancing across the gravel driveway and causing the old windmill to creak in protest. Tom spent the morning methodically working through his preparations. He filled the generator's tank, checked the sump pump in the basement, and moved the more vulnerable equipment into the barn. His movements were deliberate but unhurried, the actions of a man who had learned that panic served no purpose when facing nature's fury. By noon, the first fat raindrops began to fall, creating small craters in the dusty soil. The storm intensified throughout the afternoon, transforming from scattered showers to a deluge that obscured the view beyond the barn. Lightning split the sky with increasing frequency, each flash followed by thunder that rattled the windows. Tom settled into his recliner with a cup of coffee and a farming magazine. Duke curled at his feet. The power flickered twice before finally surrendering around 4 o'clock, plunging the house into premature twilight. Tom had just finished lighting the oil lamps when headlights swept across the living room wall. He peered through the rain-streaked window, surprised to see a car struggling up his driveway. The vehicle, a silver sedan clearly not designed for rural roads in severe weather, fish-tailed slightly before coming to a stop near the house. Tom grabbed his raincoat and headed for the door, wondering what kind of emergency would bring someone. Out in this weather, the driver's door opened and a woman emerged, immediately drenched by the torrential rain. She appeared to be in her mid-30s, wearing what had probably been an expensive business suit before the storm transformed it into a sodden mess. Her dark hair clung to her face as she hurried toward the porch, slipping slightly on the wet steps. Tom held the door open, ushering her inside without hesitation. It was an unwritten rule in farm country that you never turned away someone seeking shelter, especially during severe weather. The woman stumbled into the warmth of the kitchen, shivering and apologetic. "I'm so sorry to bother you," she said, her teeth chattering slightly. "My GPS led me down what it claimed was a shortcut, but the road washed out about 2 miles back. Yours was the first driveway I found." "No bother at all," Tom replied, already moving to grab towels from the linen closet. "Storm's not fit for man nor beast tonight. Name's Tom Bradley." "Sarah Mitchell," she responded, accepting the towels gratefully. "I can't thank you enough. My phone's dead, and I was starting to think I'd have to spend the night in my car." Tom noticed the quality of her clothes despite their waterlogged state, the designer handbag, and the subtle but expensive jewelry. Everything about Sarah Mitchell suggested she was far from her usual environment. He gestured toward the kitchen table. "Coffee's still hot, or I can make tea if you prefer. Power's out, but the stove's gas." "Coffee would be wonderful," Sarah said, wringing water from her hair. "I was on my way to Lincoln for a meeting tomorrow morning. Thought I could beat the storm if I took the back roads." As Tom poured coffee into a chipped mug that had survived decades of use, he studied his unexpected guest more carefully. Despite her disheveled appearance, there was something composed about her, a sense of purpose that seemed at odds with her current predicament. She accepted the coffee with steady hands, wrapping them around the mug for warmth. "You picked quite a night to travel," Tom observed, settling into the chair across from her. "Weather Service has been warning about this system for days." Sarah's laugh held a note of self-deprecation. "I know. Classic city person mistake, thinking I knew better than local wisdom. My colleagues warned me, but I've always been stubborn about keeping appointments." Duke padded over to investigate the newcomer, his tail wagging slowly. Sarah reached down to pet him, and Tom noticed how naturally she interacted with the dog, suggesting familiarity with animals despite her urban appearance. "He likes you," Tom noted. "Duke's usually suspicious of strangers." "I grew up with dogs," Sarah explained. "My father always said you could judge a person's character by how animals respond to them." The conversation flowed easily as the storm raged outside. Tom learned that Sarah worked as a consultant, though she remained vague about the specifics of her job. She asked intelligent questions about farming, showing genuine interest in the challenges of modern agriculture. Tom found himself opening up about the farm's history, sharing stories he rarely told anyone these days. "My grandfather bought this land in 1923, he explained, gesturing around the kitchen. "Built this house with his own hands. 4 generations of Bradleys have worked this soil." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Will there be a 5th? Sarah asked gently. Tom's smile held a touch of sadness. "My son Michael chose a different path. Can't say I blame him. Farming's not for everyone, and the world's changing faster than old farmers like me can keep up." The wind howled with increased ferocity, causing the house to creak and groan. Sarah glanced nervously at the ceiling as a particularly strong gust shook the windows. "Is it always this bad?" "This one's special," Tom admitted. "Haven't seen a storm like this since '93. That one took out half my corn crop and relocated my neighbor's chicken coop to the next county." Sarah's phone suddenly chirped, startling them both. She pulled it from her purse, frowning at the screen. "That's odd. I thought the battery was completely dead." She tapped at the device, her expression shifting from confusion to concern. "I need to make a call," she said, standing abruptly. "Is there somewhere private I could—" "Use the study," Tom offered, pointing down the hallway. "First door on the right." As Sarah disappeared into the study, Tom cleared their coffee cups, wondering about the sudden change in her demeanor. The storm seemed to pause for a moment, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Then the rain resumed with renewed intensity, drumming against the roof like an army of drummers. Sarah emerged from the study 10 minutes later, her expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Bradley, Tom, I need to tell you something, but I'm not sure how to begin." Tom leaned against the kitchen counter, studying her face. "In my experience, the beginning is usually the best place to start." She took a deep breath. "My car breaking down here wasn't entirely an accident. Well, the storm was real enough, but my being on this particular road at this particular time, I was looking for you." Tom felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the same sensation he'd experienced years ago when the sheriff had arrived to tell him about Grace's accident. "Looking for me? Why?" Sarah reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew a leather wallet. When she flipped it open, Tom saw the glint of a badge and official-looking identification. "My name is Sarah Mitchell, but I haven't been entirely honest about why I'm here. I work for the federal government, specifically with the Department of Agriculture's Special Investigations Unit." Tom's mind raced through possibilities. Had he violated some obscure regulation? Was there an issue with his crop insurance claims? He'd always been meticulous about paperwork, following every rule to the letter. "Have I done something wrong?" he asked, his voice steady despite his concern. "Quite the opposite," Sarah assured him. "You've done something very right, though you don't know it yet. 27 years ago, you filed a report with the USDA about soil composition changes in this region. Do you remember?" Tom frowned, searching his memory. "Vaguely. I noticed some unusual mineral deposits after a drought season. Thought it might be important for the county extension office to know about." Sarah nodded. "Your observation was more important than you realized. That report triggered a chain of research that eventually led to the development of a revolutionary soil treatment process. It's taken decades of testing and refinement, but the technology is finally ready for implementation." "I don't understand," Tom said. "What does this have to do with me showing up at my door in the middle of a storm?" "The president is announcing the national rollout of this program tomorrow morning. It's part of a comprehensive rural revitalization initiative that could transform American agriculture. And Tom, you're the reason it exists. That's why I was sent to find you. The president wants to meet the farmer whose simple observation changed everything. Tom stared at her, certain he'd misheard over the sound of the storm. The president of the United States wants to meet me because of a soil report I filed when I was 35? Among other things, Sarah said, your name came up during the research phase. We discovered you've been quietly innovating sustainable farming practices for decades. The water conservation system you developed during the 2012 drought, the crop rotation method you've been using, these aren't just local success stories, they're models for the future of American agriculture. Tom sat down heavily, his mind struggling to process this information. He thought about all the years he'd spent feeling like a relic, watching young farmers abandon traditional methods for corporate agriculture. Now this woman was telling him his work had national significance. There's more, Sarah continued. The president's initiative includes a proposal to establish regional agricultural innovation centers. We want to build the first one here in Willow Creek, with you as the senior advisor. It would bring jobs, research funding, and new life to the community. The storm chose that moment to unleash its full fury. A deafening crack of thunder shook the house, and the windows rattled in their frames. Somewhere in the distance, Tom heard the unmistakable sound of a tree falling. We should check the storm cellar, he said automatically, his farmer's instincts overriding his shock at Sarah's revelation. This is tornado weather. As if in response to his words, the town's emergency sirens began to wail. Tom grabbed a flashlight and led Sarah to the basement door. Duke followed, his ears flat against his head in response to the noise. The storm cellar was a relic from the 1950s, built by Tom's father during the height of Cold War paranoia. It had served as a tornado shelter more times than Tom could count, its reinforced concrete walls providing safety when nature turned violent. He lit the emergency lanterns, casting a warm glow over the sparse furnishings, a cot, some folding chairs, and shelves stocked with supplies. Cozy, Sarah observed, trying to maintain composure despite the chaos above. It's kept the Bradleys safe for 70 years, Tom replied, though I never expected to be sharing it with a federal agent. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the storm rage overhead. The sound was muffled but still impressive, like being inside a drum during a percussion solo. Can I ask you something? Tom finally said. Why all the secrecy? Why not just call or send an official letter? Sarah smiled ruefully. The announcement tomorrow is carefully orchestrated. The president wants to highlight real farmers, not politicians or bureaucrats. Your story, a lifelong farmer whose simple observations sparked an agricultural revolution. It's exactly the kind of American success story people need to hear right now. But I didn't do anything special, Tom protested. I just noticed something odd and reported it. Any farmer would have done the same. That's exactly the point, Sarah said. You represent everything that's good about American agriculture. Dedication, observation, innovation born from necessity. The president calls people like you the backbone of America. The storm's intensity gradually diminished, though rain continued to fall steadily. After an hour, Tom deemed it safe to return upstairs. The damage was less severe than he'd feared. Some broken branches, a section of guttering torn loose, but nothing catastrophic. Your car's not going anywhere tonight, Tom observed, looking out at the muddy driveway. Roads will be impassable until morning at least. You're welcome to stay. Guest rooms made up. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. Thank you. I should make some calls, let people know where I am. As she disappeared to make her calls, Tom stood at the kitchen window, watching the last of the storm clouds drift eastward. His mind struggled to reconcile his simple life with the revelation that he'd unknowingly influenced national agricultural policy. The thought of meeting the president, of being involved in something larger than his 120 acres, both thrilled and terrified him. Sarah returned, looking slightly amused. Well, that was interesting. Apparently, my disappearing during a major storm caused quite a stir. They're sending a team to extract me at first light. Extract you? Tom echoed. You make it sound like a military operation. When it involves the president's schedule, everything becomes a military operation, she replied. Which reminds me, they'll need to do a security sweep of your property, standard procedure before any presidential visit. The casual mention of a presidential visit to his farm made Tom's head spin. Wait, the president is coming here. To my farm? Not immediately, Sarah clarified. But yes, there are plans for a visit during the initiative rollout. Your farm would be the perfect backdrop for the announcement. Real America, as the communications team keeps saying. Tom spent the rest of the evening in a daze, mechanically going through his nighttime routines while his mind grappled with the day's revelations. He showed Sarah to the guest room, the same room Michael used during his increasingly rare visits home. As he lay in his own bed, listening to the now gentle rain on the roof, Tom thought about Grace. What would she make of all this? She'd always believed he was special, even when he felt like just another farmer trying to make ends meet. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and filled with strange dreams. Tom saw himself shaking hands with shadowy figures in suits standing in front of crowds, his familiar fields transformed into something he didn't recognize. He woke several times, each instance accompanied by the disorienting realization that the evening's conversation hadn't been a dream. Dawn arrived with a clarity that only follows major storms. The air felt scrubbed clean, and the early morning light painted the wet fields in shades of gold and green. Tom was already on his second cup of coffee when he heard the distant thrum of helicopter rotors. He stepped onto the porch just as 3 black SUVs turned into his driveway, moving with the kind of coordinated precision that spoke of extensive training. The vehicles came to a synchronized stop, and several people in dark suits emerged, their movements efficient and purposeful. Sarah joined him on the porch, now wearing fresh clothes she'd apparently had in her car. Right on schedule, she murmured. Tom Bradley, meet your government. The lead agent, a tall man with prematurely gray hair, approached the porch. Agent David Harper, Secret Service, he introduced himself, showing his credentials. Mr. Bradley, I understand you've been briefed on the situation. Tom nodded, still feeling like he was living in someone else's story. More or less, though I'm still not sure I believe it. Agent Harper's professional demeanor cracked slightly, revealing a hint of humor. Believe me, sir, we've verified everything multiple times. You're the genuine article. The president is very eager to meet you. As the agents began their security assessment of the property, Sarah pulled Tom aside. There's something else. I should tell you, she said quietly. The research team found more than just your soil report. They discovered a pattern in your farming methods that could revolutionize water conservation in drought-prone regions. Tom, you've been unconsciously developing solutions to problems we're only now beginning to understand. The morning passed. In the blur of activity, agents photographed every building, checked sightlines, and discussed contingency plans in clipped professional tones. Tom answered questions about property boundaries, access roads, and structural details of the house and barn. Through it all, he maintained the calm demeanor that had served him through countless challenges, even as his mind struggled to keep pace with events. By noon, a communications team had arrived to discuss the logistics of the president's future visit. They talked about camera angles and backdrop options with the same intensity Tom usually reserved for harvest planning. The Surreal nature of the situation was emphasized when one eager young staffer suggested they could clean up the barn for better visuals. "The barn stays as it is," Tom said firmly, surprising himself with his assertiveness. "If the president wants to see real farming, then that's what he'll get. We don't prettify things for visitors out here." Agent Harper nodded approvingly. "The president will appreciate that, sir. Authenticity is exactly what he's looking for." As the day progressed, Tom found himself growing more comfortable with the federal presence on his property. These were professional people doing their jobs, not so different from the seasonal workers he hired during harvest. By evening, when most of the teams had departed, Tom felt almost normal again. Sarah stayed behind after the others left, helping Tom prepare a simple dinner of beef stew and cornbread. They ate on the porch, watching the sunset paint the storm-cleansed sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "You know," Tom said, breaking a comfortable silence, "yesterday morning I was just a farmer worried about the weather. Now I'm apparently some kind of agricultural pioneer. It's a lot to process." Sarah smiled sympathetically. "You've always been both. The only thing that's changed is that now other people know it too." "What happens next?" Tom asked. "Tomorrow, you'll fly to Washington for a briefing. The day after that, you'll meet the president. And after that, well, that's partly up to you. This initiative needs voices like yours, Tom. Authentic voices that understand both the challenges and the potential of American agriculture." Tom thought about Michael, about the grandson he might have someday, about the generations of Bradleys who had worked this land. Maybe this was how the family legacy continued, not just through direct inheritance, but through influence and innovation that reached beyond property lines. As if reading his thoughts, Sarah added, "You should call your son. He should hear about this from you, not the news." Tom nodded, knowing she was right. Michael had always been proud of his father in his own way, even if he'd chosen a different path. This news might bridge some of the distance between them. Later that evening, after Sarah had retired to the guest room, Tom sat at his kitchen table with his phone in hand. He dialed Michael's number, his heart beating faster than it had all day. When his son answered, Tom took a deep breath. "Michael, it's Dad. You're not going to believe what happened during that storm yesterday." As Tom recounted the extraordinary events of the past 24 hours, he could hear the amazement in Michael's voice. For the first time in years, they talked for over an hour, the conversation flowing naturally without the usual awkward pauses. By the time they hung up, Michael had promised to fly home for the weekend to see his father before the Washington trip. Tom walked out onto the porch one last time before bed. The stars were brilliant in the clear post-storm sky, and the air smelled of rich earth and growing things. His farm looked exactly as it had for decades, yet everything had changed. Tomorrow would bring a journey to the nation's capital, a meeting with the president, and the beginning of a new chapter he'd never imagined. Duke padded out to join him, leaning against his leg in quiet solidarity. Tom reached down to scratch the old dog's ears, thinking about all the seasons they'd witnessed together, all the storms they'd weathered. Now it seemed they were about to weather a different kind of storm, one that might just transform not only their lives, but the future of American agriculture itself. As he turned to go inside, Tom paused, looking back at his fields one more time. The corn stood tall and straight, recovering from the storm's assault with the resilience that characterized all living things on the prairie. Like the crops he tended, Tom realized he too would adapt to this new reality, growing in directions he'd never anticipated. The screen door creaked as he entered the house, the same sound it had made for generations. Some things would change, Tom knew, but the important things, the land, the work, the connection to something greater than himself, those would remain. And maybe, just maybe, his simple observation about soil composition would help ensure that future generations of farmers could continue the vital work of feeding the nation. Tomorrow would bring Secret Service agents and helicopter rides and meetings with the most powerful person in the country. But tonight, Tom Bradley was still just a farmer in Nebraska, grateful for the rain that nourished his crops and the unexpected turns that life could take. As he climbed the stairs to bed, he found himself looking forward to tomorrow for the first time in years, curious about what other surprises might be waiting in the rich soil of possibility. The next morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that only follows violent storms, the sun casting long shadows across Tom's rain-soaked fields. He stood at his bedroom window, coffee cup in hand, watching as government vehicles began arriving with the precision of a military operation. By 7 o'clock, his normally quiet farmyard resembled a federal command center, complete with satellite trucks and communication equipment. Sarah appeared at his kitchen door, looking remarkably professional, despite having spent the night in his guest room. She'd somehow managed to acquire a fresh pantsuit, and her hair was pulled back in a neat bun that made her look every inch the government official she was. "Ready for your first briefing?" she asked, accepting the coffee he offered. Tom glanced down at his worn jeans and faded work shirt. "Should I change? I don't exactly own many suits." "You're perfect as you are," Sarah assured him. "The president specifically requested that you remain authentic. No handlers, no image consultants, just Tom Bradley, American farmer." The first briefing took place at Tom's own kitchen table, a fact that struck him as both absurd and somehow fitting. Elizabeth Chen, a senior advisor from the Department of Agriculture, spread documents across the worn oak surface where Tom had eaten countless meals alone since Grace's passing. "Mr. Bradley," Elizabeth began, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to high-level meetings, "what you're about to learn has been classified for the past 2 decades. Your soil composition report from 1997 triggered a series of discoveries that could revolutionize global agriculture." She pulled out a series of charts and graphs that meant little to Tom at first glance. "The mineral deposits you identified weren't random geological formations. They were evidence of a natural process that, when properly understood, allows for dramatic improvements in soil fertility without chemical fertilizers." Tom studied the documents, his practical farmer's mind gradually making sense of the scientific terminology. "You're saying these minerals can replace synthetic fertilizers?" "Not just replace," Elizabeth clarified, "improve upon. The process is completely sustainable, increases crop yields by an average of 40%, and actually improves soil quality over time rather than depleting it." Agent Harper entered the kitchen, his presence a reminder of how dramatically Tom's life had shifted. "Sir, we need to discuss security protocols for your trip to Washington. The president has requested a private meeting before the public announcement." Tom's head was spinning with information overload. "Private meeting? I thought this was about some agricultural initiative." Sarah exchanged glances with Elizabeth before responding. "Tom, the initiative is just the beginning. The president sees you as a symbol of American innovation and resilience. Your story, a farmer who unknowingly discovered a solution to one of humanity's greatest challenges, it's exactly what the country needs right now." The morning progressed with a whirlwind of preparations. A stylist arrived to ensure Tom's clothes would be appropriate for meeting the president, though she respected his insistence on maintaining his authentic appearance. A communications specialist coached him on protocol and media interactions, though Tom's natural, straightforward manner required little adjustment. By noon, a helicopter had landed in Tom's south pasture, its rotors sending ripples through the standing water left by the storm. Tom found himself thinking of Grace again, wishing she could see this moment. She'd always believed he was destined for something beyond their small corner of Nebraska. Michael called just as Tom was preparing to board the helicopter. "Dad, I still can't believe this is happening. My father meeting the president. My colleagues think I'm making it up." "Join the club," Tom replied, watching as agents loaded his simple overnight bag into the aircraft. "I keep expecting to wake up and find this was all some strange dream, brought on by storm stress." "Listen, Dad," Michael's voice softened. "I know I haven't always understood your dedication to the farm, but I've never been prouder to be your son. What you've accomplished, it's incredible." The words hit Tom harder than any of the morning's revelations. For years he'd felt like he'd somehow failed Michael by not being more ambitious, more modern in his thinking. Now his son was expressing pride in exactly the qualities Tom had always considered limitations. The helicopter ride to Omaha's Epley airfield was Tom's first time flying in anything smaller than a commercial airliner. As they soared over the Nebraska landscape, he gained a new perspective on the land he'd worked his entire life. From above, the geometric patterns of fields and the meandering paths of rivers told a story of human interaction with nature that stretched back generations. Sarah sat beside him, pointing out landmarks and explaining more about the scientific discoveries his observation had triggered. "The research team calls it the Bradley process now," she said, having to raise her voice over the helicopter's noise. "It's already being tested in 12 countries. At Epley Airfield, they transferred to a government jet that made Tom's rare. Commercial flights seem primitive by comparison. The luxury made him uncomfortable until he reminded himself that he was here to represent farmers like himself, not to become something he wasn't. During the flight to Washington, Elizabeth Chen continued Tom's education about the full scope of the agricultural initiative. "We're not just talking about soil improvement," she explained, spreading more documents on the conference table. "Your water conservation methods during the 2012 drought saved your crop, while neighboring farms lost everything. The techniques you developed could help prevent famine in water-stressed regions worldwide." Tom shook his head in amazement. "I was just trying to keep my corn alive. You make it sound like I was conducting scientific research." The best innovations often come from necessity," Elizabeth replied. "That's why the president wants to restructure how we approach agricultural research. Instead of top-down directives from Washington, we need to listen to farmers who are solving real problems in real time." The approach to Reagan National Airport gave Tom his first glimpse of Washington, D.C. The monuments and government buildings looked exactly as they did in photographs, yet somehow more imposing in person. As the plane descended, Tom felt the weight of history and responsibility settling on his shoulders. A motorcade waited on the tarmac, more black SUVs with tinted windows and motorcycle escorts. Tom had seen such processions on television, but never imagined he'd be riding in one. The journey through Washington streets felt surreal, tourists stopping to stare and wonder what dignitary might be passing by. They arrived at a nondescript government building where Tom was subjected to the most thorough security screening of his life. Even his worn leather wallet, a gift from Grace on their 10th anniversary, was examined with sophisticated scanning equipment. "The president will see you in 30 minutes, an aide informed him, leading Tom to a comfortable waiting room. "Can I get you anything? Coffee, water?" "I'm fine, thank you," Tom replied, though his mouth felt dry with nervousness. He'd faced droughts, storms, and market crashes with steady hands, but meeting the leader of the free world was an entirely different kind of challenge. Sarah sat beside him, offering quiet reassurance. "Just be yourself, Tom. That's why you're here. The president values authenticity above all else." When the moment finally arrived, Tom was escorted through a series of corridors to a private office. The door opened, and there stood the President of the United States, hand extended in greeting. "Tom Bradley," the President said, his famous smile genuine and warm. "I've been looking forward to this meeting for weeks." Tom shook the offered hand, surprised by the President's firm grip and direct eye contact. "Mr. President, I'm honored, though I'm still not entirely sure why I'm here." The President laughed, gesturing for Tom to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "That's exactly why you're here, Tom. Do you know how rare it is to meet someone who's changed the world without trying to take credit for it?" Over the next hour, Tom found himself in the most extraordinary conversation of his life. The President asked detailed questions about farming, about the challenges facing rural America, about Tom's observations over decades of working the land. Unlike many politicians Tom had encountered, the President listened more than he spoke, taking notes and asking follow-up questions that showed genuine understanding. "The Bradley process," the President said, using the term that still made Tom uncomfortable, "could help us address climate change, food security, and economic inequality all at once. But technology alone isn't enough. We need to change how we think about agriculture, how we support farmers, how we connect rural and urban America." And Tom nodded, finding his voice. "With respect, Mr. President, farmers have been innovating for generations. The problem isn't lack of ideas. It's that nobody in Washington has been listening." The President leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "That's exactly what needs to change. And that's why I want you to be the face of this initiative. Not politicians, not bureaucrats, but a real farmer who understands both the challenges and the possibilities." As the meeting continued, Tom began to understand the scope of what was being proposed. The agricultural innovation centers would be more than research facilities. They would be places where experienced farmers could share knowledge, where young people could learn sustainable farming practices, where rural communities could access resources to revitalize their economies. "We want to start in Willow Creek," the President explained. "Your farm would be the flagship site. We'd preserve its working status while adding facilities for research and education. Think of it as a living laboratory where tradition meets innovation." Tom thought about his empty farmhouse, about Michael in Seattle, about the young people who left places like Willow Creek because they saw no future in farming. It would bring jobs back to the community. Jobs, research funding, educational opportunities, the President confirmed. But more than that, it would send a message that rural America isn't forgotten, that farmers are essential to our future, not relics of our past. As the meeting wound down, the President stood and walked to the window overlooking the Capitol. "Tom, I grew up in a small town myself. I know what it's like to feel overlooked by the coastal elites. This initiative is about more than agriculture. It's about healing the divide in our country, showing that innovation can come from anywhere, that wisdom isn't confined to ivory towers." Tom joined him at the window, looking out at the symbols of American democracy. "My wife, Grace, always said the farm was more than just land. She said it was a testament to persistence, to faith in the future. I think she would have understood what you're trying to do." The President placed a hand on Tom's shoulder. "I think she would have been proud of what you've accomplished, even if you didn't know you were accomplishing it." The next morning brought the public announcement. Tom stood on a stage in the Rose Garden, surrounded by cabinet officials, agricultural experts, and members of Congress from both parties. The bipartisan support for the initiative surprised him until Sarah explained that food security was one of the few issues that transcended political divisions. When introduced, Tom approached the podium with the same steady gait he used when walking his fields. The crowd of reporters and dignitaries blurred into background as he focused on the teleprompter, then decided to ignore it entirely. "I'm not much for speeches," he began, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "I'm just a farmer from Nebraska who noticed something odd in his soil 27 years ago. The fact that this observation led to scientific breakthroughs says more about the importance of paying attention to the land than it does about me personally." He paused, gathering his thoughts. Farmers have been the original scientists since the dawn of agriculture. We experiment, we observe, we adapt. The difference now is that someone's finally listening. This initiative isn't about one man's discovery. It's about recognizing that solutions to our biggest challenges might be growing in fields across America, tended by people who've never set foot in a laboratory. The applause that followed surprised Tom with its enthusiasm. He spoke for another 10 minutes about the need to bridge the gap between rural wisdom and scientific research, about the importance of sustainable farming practices, about hope for rural communities that had felt left behind by progress. After the ceremony, Tom found himself surrounded by reporters asking questions he could barely comprehend through the cacophony. Sarah appeared at his elbow, guiding him through the crowd with practiced efficiency. "You did beautifully," she said once they reached the relative quiet of a secured area. "The president's team is calling it the most authentic speech they've heard in years." "I just told the truth," Tom replied, loosening his collar slightly. "Isn't that what I was supposed to do?" The rest of the day passed in a blur of interviews, photo opportunities, and meetings with agricultural leaders from around the world. Tom learned that pilot programs based on his methods were already showing promising results in drought-stricken regions of Africa and water-stressed areas of India. That evening, exhausted but exhilarated, Tom called Michael from his hotel room. "Son, you won't believe the day I've had." "Actually, Dad, I might," Michael replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I watched the announcement live. The whole office stopped to watch. Dad, I'm coming home." Tom sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm coming home to Willow Creek. If they're building an innovation center, they'll need someone to handle the technology infrastructure. I've already talked to my boss about working remotely during the transition." For the first time since Grace's death, Tom felt tears welling in his eyes. "Michael, you don't have to do this. Your life is in Seattle." "No, Dad, my life is wherever. I can make a difference. And right now, that's beside you, helping to build something that matters." "Besides," Michael's voice lightened, "someone needs to teach you how to use all the fancy equipment they'll be installing." After the call, Tom stood at his hotel window, looking out at the illuminated monuments of Washington. In the distance, the Capitol dome glowed against the night sky, a symbol of the democracy that had somehow elevated a simple farmer to national significance. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Car will pick you up at 7 a.m. More interviews scheduled. Also, architectural team wants your input on innovation center designs. Welcome to your new life." Tom smiled, thinking about the changes coming to Willow Creek. The farm that had been in his family for 4 generations would remain a farm, but it would also become something more. A place where tradition and innovation could coexist, where young people might see a future in agriculture, where the wisdom accumulated over decades of working, the land could be shared and amplified. As he prepared for bed, Tom's thoughts turned to the storm that had brought Sarah to his door. In farming, you learned that the most violent storms often preceded the most bountiful harvests. The upheaval in his life felt similar, a necessary disruption that would lead to new growth. The next morning brought another round of interviews and meetings. Tom found himself discussing soil science with PhDs, explaining water management to environmental groups, and sharing farming anecdotes with reporters who had never set foot on a farm. Through it all, he maintained the quiet dignity that had characterized his entire life. During a break between sessions, Elizabeth Chen pulled him aside. "Tom, I need to tell you something else. The international applications of the Bradley process are even more significant than we initially revealed. The UN's Agricultural Division believes it could help prevent the famines predicted for the next decade. Tom leaned against a marble pillar, overwhelmed by the implications. All from noticing some unusual minerals in my field, all from paying attention, Elizabeth corrected, and having the wisdom to recognize that something unusual might be important. That's the kind of thinking we need more of. The afternoon brought a surprise visitor. Robert Thornton, the president's chief of staff, arrived with news that would further alter Tom's trajectory. The president would like you to consider a formal advisory role, he explained. Nothing that would take you away from your farm permanently, but we need your voice in policy discussions. Tom's first instinct was to decline. He was a farmer, not a politician or bureaucrat, but then he thought about all the farmers like himself who had never had a voice in the decisions that affected their lives and livelihoods. I'll do it on condition, Tom said finally. I stay based in Willow Creek. If I'm going to advise on agricultural policy, I need to keep my hands in the soil. Thornton smiled, extending his hand. The president anticipated you'd say exactly that. Welcome to the team, Mr. Bradley. The final event of the Washington trip was a dinner with agricultural leaders from around the world. Tom found himself seated between a Dutch hydroponics expert and a Brazilian coffee plantation owner, discussing farming techniques across cultural and linguistic barriers. Despite their different backgrounds, they shared a common language of soil, seasons, and harvests. As the evening progressed, Tom realized he was no longer feeling like an imposter among these educated, accomplished people. His lifetime of practical experience was just as valuable as their academic credentials. More importantly, his commitment to sustainable, observant farming represented exactly what the world needed. The Dutch expert raised her glass in a toast to Tom Bradley, who reminds us that the most profound discoveries often come from simply paying attention to what the earth is telling us. The sentiment echoed something Grace used to say, "The land speaks to those who listen." Tom had been listening his entire life. Now, finally, the world was ready to hear what he and farmers like him had learned. On the flight back to Nebraska, Tom drafted notes for the Innovation Center project. His ideas flowed freely now, unburdened by self-doubt. He envisioned greenhouses where students could experiment with drought-resistant crops, workshops where experienced farmers could share traditional techniques, laboratories where soil samples from across the region could be analyzed and understood. Sarah reviewed his notes, nodding approvingly. "You're thinking like a visionary now, Tom." "I'm thinking like a farmer who's been given resources," Tom corrected. "There's a difference. Visionaries imagine what could be. Farmers figure out how to make it happen." The plane descended through clouds toward Omaha, the flat expanse of the Great Plains spreading out below. Tom could see the geometric patterns of farms, the silver threads of rivers, the small clusters of buildings that marked towns like Willow Creek. From this height, the connections between land, water, and community were visible in ways they weren't from the ground. As they prepared to land, Tom's phone buzzed with a message from Betty Wilson, his neighbor. "Saw you on TV, Tom. About time someone listened to us farmers. P.S. Your corn looks ready for harvest. Need help while you're playing." "Celebrity?" Tom chuckled, showing the message to Sarah. "This is why I need to stay grounded in Willow Creek. My neighbors won't let me get a big head." The motorcade from Omaha Airport to Willow Creek felt different from the one in Washington. As they passed through small towns, people had gathered along the route, holding handmade signs, "Proud of our neighbor Tom," and "Willow Creek feeding the future." When they finally turned onto the familiar gravel road leading to his farm, Tom saw vehicles lining his driveway. The entire community had turned out to welcome him home. A banner stretched across his barn read, "Welcome home, Tom Bradley, local hero, national treasure." Michael stood at the front of the crowd, having driven through the night from Seattle. Beside him was Betty Wilson, Sheriff Henderson, and what looked like half of Willow Creek's population. As Tom stepped out of the SUV, the crowd erupted in applause. "Speech!" someone called out, and others took up the chant. Tom climbed onto his porch steps, looking out at the faces of people he'd known his entire life. These were the folks who had supported him after Grace's death, who had helped with harvests when he was short-handed, who had maintained the fabric of rural community despite economic hardships. "I'm not going to pretend that the last few days haven't been surreal," he began, his voice carrying across the yard. "But standing here, seeing all of you, I'm reminded of what's really important. The innovation center we're building isn't about me, it's about us. It's about proving that rural communities aren't just hanging on to the past. We're creating the future." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "The president talks about healing divisions in our country. Well, it starts right here, with neighbors, helping neighbors, with communities believing in themselves, with the understanding that wisdom comes in many forms. We're going to show the world what's possible when you combine traditional knowledge with new technology, when you listen to the land and to each other." The applause this time was thunderous. As people surged forward to congratulate him, Tom caught Michael's eye across the crowd. His son was beaming with pride, already discussing plans with a group of young people who had returned to Willow Creek after hearing about the Innovation Center project. Later that evening, after the crowds had dispersed and the excitement had settled into a quiet satisfaction, Tom sat on his porch with Michael and Duke. The stars were brilliant in the clear Nebraska sky, and the air smelled of approaching autumn. "Dad," Michael said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I've been thinking about Mom a lot these past few days. What do you think she would say about all this?" Tom considered the question carefully. "I think she'd say it's about time the world recognized what she always knew, that there's genius in simplicity, wisdom in observation, and hope in every planted seed." Duke shifted at their feet, his tail thumping against the porch boards. In the distance, an owl called across the fields, and the wind rustled through the corn that would soon be ready for harvest. "You know what the best part is?" Tom continued. "This is just the beginning. Every farmer who's ever noticed something unusual, every rural innovator who's solved a local problem, every person who's listened to what the land is telling them, they're all part of this story now." Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've spent years writing code, creating virtual solutions to digital problems. But what you've done, finding a real solution to real problems just by paying attention, it makes my work seem almost trivial." "Not trivial," Tom corrected. "Different. We're going to need your skills to make this innovation center work. The future of farming isn't just about soil and seeds. It's about data, communication, connecting knowledge across distances. It's about bridging your world and mine." As if to emphasize his point, Michael's laptop chimed with an incoming email. "It's from the Department of Agriculture," he said, scanning the message. "They want my input on the digital infrastructure for the Innovation Center. They're talking about creating a network that could connect rural innovation centers across the country, sharing real-time data on soil conditions, weather patterns, crop yields." Tom smiled, remembering his conversation with the president about healing divisions. Here, on his front porch, the bridge between rural and urban, traditional and technological, past and future, was already being built. The next few weeks brought a whirlwind of activity to Willow Creek. Survey teams arrived to assess locations for the Innovation Center. Architects presented designs that incorporated both cutting-edge technology and traditional barn aesthetics. The local newspaper, which typically focused on high school sports and county fair results, found itself covering stories of national significance. Tom divided his time between harvest preparations and planning meetings. His dining room table, once the site of solitary meals, now hosted regular gatherings of scientists, educators, and community leaders. Betty Wilson appointed herself unofficial hospitality coordinator, ensuring everyone was fed with hearty farm cooking. One afternoon, while Tom was combining corn, a helicopter landed in his recently harvested wheat field. Elizabeth Chen emerged, accompanied by several international agricultural experts who wanted to see the famous Bradley fields firsthand. "We're not interrupting your harvest, are we?" Elizabeth asked, having to shout over the combine's engine. Tom shut down the machine and climbed down to greet them. "Harvest waits for no one, but I can spare a few minutes. What brings you all the way out here?" "The Brazilian delegation wanted to see where it all started," she explained, gesturing to the group, photographing his soil. "They're implementing the Bradley process across their entire agricultural sector." Tom watched as the renowned scientists knelt in his field, examining the soil with the same reverence he'd always felt for the land. It struck him that his simple observation had created a common language, a shared understanding that transcended borders and cultures. As the delegation prepared to leave, one of the Brazilian scientists approached Tom. "Mr. Bradley, in my country, we have a saying, 'The earth remembers those who listen to her secrets.' You have listened well." That evening, as Tom updated his harvest records, a task he'd performed countless times over the decades, he reflected on how his relationship with the land had evolved. The soil beneath his feet held not just crops, but possibilities. Each furrow contained potential solutions to global challenges. Michael found him in the farm office, surrounded by ledgers and laptops. "Dad, I've been thinking, what if we document everything? Not just the scientific stuff, but the whole story. Your observations over the years, the way you problem solve, the intuitive understanding you have of the land. It could be a template for other farmers." Tom looked at his son, seeing not just the tech expert from Seattle, but a bridge between generations. "You mean like a farmer's journal for the digital age?" "Exactly. We could create a platform where farmers worldwide share observations, solutions, innovations, democratize agricultural knowledge." The idea energized Tom in a way he hadn't felt since Grace was alive. Together, father and son began sketching out plans, their different perspectives merging into something neither could have created alone. As autumn progressed, the transformation of Willow Creek accelerated. The old Henderson property, abandoned for a decade, was purchased for the Innovation Center. Construction crews arrived, followed by technology installers and educational program developers. The sleepy farm town buzzed with activity and purpose. Tom's role evolved from simple farmer to community leader, advisor, and symbol of rural ingenuity. He accepted speaking invitations at agricultural conferences, testified before congressional committees, and consulted with international delegations. Through it all, he maintained his daily farming routines, rising before dawn to check his fields, ending each day with a walk through his crops. One evening, as the first frost of the season silvered the grass, Tom received a call from the White House. The president wanted to visit Willow Creek for the Innovation Center groundbreaking. "Sir," the president said, his voice warm over the phone, "I want to see this transformation firsthand. More importantly, I want the American people to see what's possible when we invest in rural communities and listen to the wisdom of those who feed our nation." The announcement of the presidential visit sent Willow Creek into a frenzy of preparation. The town hadn't seen such excitement since the state high school basketball championship in 1994. Streets were cleaned, buildings painted, and the Historical Society hastily assembled a display about the town's agricultural heritage. Tom found himself at the center of it all, coordinating between federal advance teams and local committees. He insisted that the visit showcase the real Willow Creek, not a sanitized version created for political optics. The president wants to see authentic America, Tom reminded the planning committee. That means Bob's Hardware with its creaky floor, Martha's Diner with its famous pie, and yes, even the grain elevator that needs painting. We're not hiding who we are. The night before the visit, Tom couldn't sleep. He walked his fields under, a full moon, Duke padding alongside despite his arthritic joints. The land that had been his entire world for 6 decades was about to become a symbol of national renewal. The responsibility felt overwhelming until he remembered Grace's words. The land doesn't ask us to be perfect, just faithful. And as he stood among his cornstalks, now dry and rattling in the night breeze, Tom felt a profound sense of connection to the soil beneath his feet, to the generations who had worked this land, to the future being born from simple observation and steadfast dedication. His phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Can't sleep either. Meet you at the barn?" Father and son converged at the old structure that would soon be preserved as part of the Innovation Center. They climbed to the hayloft, a favorite spot from Michael's childhood, and looked out over the moonlit fields. "Scared about tomorrow?" Michael asked. "Terrified," Tom admitted. "Not about meeting the president again, but about what all this means. What if we can't live up to the expectations?" Michael was quiet for a moment. "Dad, you've already exceeded every expectation just by being yourself. That's what's revolutionary about this whole thing. You didn't try to change the world, you just paid attention to your little piece of it." The next morning dawned crisp and clear, one of those perfect autumn days that made the Great Plains shimmer with golden light. By 8 a.m., Willow Creek's Main Street was lined with people, American flags, and homemade signs welcoming the president. Tom stood with the official greeting party, wearing his best jacket over a work shirt, his boots polished but still showing honest wear. Beside him, Michael fidgeted with his tie, and Betty Wilson checked her watch every 30 seconds. The presidential motorcade appeared on the horizon, a line of black vehicles approaching through the cornfields. As they turned onto Main Street, the crowd erupted in cheers. Children waved flags, the high school band played, and even the typically reserved farmers showed their enthusiasm. When the president emerged from his limousine, he went straight to Tom, gripping his hand warmly. "Good to see you again, Tom. This is quite a welcome." "Small towns know how to celebrate, Mr. President," Tom replied, "especially when there's something to celebrate." The groundbreaking ceremony was held in what would become the Innovation Center's main courtyard. The president spoke eloquently about rural revitalization, agricultural innovation, and the wisdom of American farmers. But it was Tom's simple words that resonated most deeply with the crowd. "A month ago, I was just a farmer worried about getting my harvest in before the weather turned," Tom said, standing at the podium with the president beside him. "Today, we're breaking ground on a facility that will help farmers around the world. It proves that solutions to our biggest challenges don't always come from laboratories or boardrooms. Sometimes they come from simply paying attention to what the earth is trying to tell us." As Tom and the president turned the first shovels of dirt, cameras clicked and the crowd applauded. The moment felt both historic and profoundly personal. To Tom, this soil he was turning had been in his family for generations. Now it would nurture a different kind of growth. After the ceremony, the president toured the farm, asking detailed questions about Tom's methods and genuinely listening to the answers. They walked through the fields, where the famous observation had been made, the president's security detail looking slightly uncomfortable amid the corn stubble. "Tom," the president said as they stood overlooking the prairie, "what you've started here is about more than agriculture. It's about restoring faith in American ingenuity, proving that wisdom exists in every corner of our nation. You've given us a template for listening to each other again. That evening, after the motorcade had departed and the crowds had dispersed, Tom sat on his porch with Michael, Duke, and several neighbors. Betty Wilson had brought her famous apple pie, and Sheriff Henderson contributed homemade ice cream. As they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, the conversation turned to the future. "Things are going to be different now," Betty observed. "Willow Creek won't be the same quiet little town anymore." "Change isn't always bad," Michael replied. "Look at what's already happening. Young people are moving back. New businesses are planning to open. The school is adding advanced agriculture courses." Tom nodded, thinking about cycles of planting and harvest, death and rebirth. Grace used to say that the land teaches us about transformation. Nothing stays the same, but if you tend it carefully, change can bring abundance. As stars emerged, in the darkening sky, Tom felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The storm that had brought Sarah Mitchell to his door had set in motion changes he could never have imagined. Yet sitting here, surrounded by family and neighbors, he realized that the most important things remained constant: community, connection to the land, and the simple wisdom that comes from paying attention. His phone buzzed with a message from the president. "Thank you for reminding us that greatness often grows in unexpected places. Looking forward to watching Willow Creek bloom." Tom shared the message with the group, prompting another round of pie and celebration. As laughter filled the evening air, he thought about the thousands of farmers across the country who might be making their own quiet observations, solving problems, innovating without recognition. The Bradley process was just the beginning. The real revolution would come when the nation learned to listen to all its overlooked voices. Later, alone in his kitchen, Tom opened his laptop, a recent gift from Michael, and began typing. He was starting the digital farmer's journal they had discussed, documenting not just agricultural techniques, but the philosophy of attentive stewardship that had guided his life. "Day 1 of the new harvest," he typed. "The soil speaks in whispers. Today, we started learning how to amplify those whispers so the whole world can hear." Outside, the wind rustled through the corn stubble, carrying the eternal promise of seasons turning, seeds waiting to sprout, and wisdom ready to be shared. The old farmhouse, witness to 4 generations of Bradley farmers, stood ready to embrace its new role in history. Tom saved his document and closed the laptop. Tomorrow would bring more meetings, more planning, more adaptation to his changing role. But tonight, he was still just a farmer who had noticed something unusual in his soil and had the humility to admit he didn't understand it. Sometimes, he reflected, the most profound revolutions begin not with grand gestures, but with simple acknowledgement of mystery. As he climbed the stairs to bed, Tom could almost hear Grace's voice on the wind. "You did good, Tom. You listened." And in listening, he had helped the world hear something vital about connection, community, and the wisdom that grows from the ground up. The Innovation Center rising from Nebraska soil would be a testament not just to scientific discovery, but to the enduring truth that solutions to humanity's greatest challenges often lie in the observations of those who work closest to the earth. As Tom drifted off to sleep, he dreamed not of presidential meetings or international acclaim, but of seeds sprouting, roots deepening, and harvests yet to come. In his dreams, the future grew from the soil of tradition, nourished by attention, patience, and the simple faith that every planted seed carries within it the promise of abundance. The next morning would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new reasons to step out onto his porch and greet the dawn. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, Tom Bradley slept the deep sleep of a farmer who had tended his field well, knowing that the best harvests come to those who pay attention to whispers in the soil. The following weeks brought a transformation to Willow Creek that exceeded even the most optimistic projections. Construction crews worked around the clock on the Innovation Center, their progress monitored by cameras that streamed footage to agricultural institutions worldwide. Tom found himself adapting to a new rhythm of life, balancing farm work with an increasingly demanding schedule of consultations and media appearances. One crisp morning in late October, Tom was reviewing architectural plans with Michael when a convoy of university vans pulled into the driveway. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, the lead researcher from Cornell's Agricultural Sciences Department, emerged with a team of graduate students, their vehicles loaded with equipment. "Mr. Bradley," she called out, her enthusiasm evident despite the early hour. "We're ready to begin the comprehensive soil analysis. This is going to revolutionize our understanding of mineral interactions in agricultural systems." Tom watched as the team unpacked sophisticated instruments he couldn't begin to name. The contrast between their high-tech approach and his simple observation years ago struck him as both ironic and appropriate. Science was finally catching up to what the land had been trying to tell them all along. "Where would you like us to start?" Dr. Hernandez asked, consulting a tablet computer that displayed satellite imagery of his property. "Same place I noticed the anomaly," Tom replied, leading them toward the east field. "Though I should warn you, I've been farming this spot continuously. Whatever you find has been working with crops for nearly 3 decades. The research team spent hours taking samples, their precise movements reminding Tom of surgeons. They extracted soil cores at various depths, carefully labeling each specimen. Graduate students photographed every step of the process, while Dr. Hernandez dictated observations into a digital recorder. Michael joined them in the field, bridging the gap between his father's practical knowledge and the scientist's technical expertise. Dad's kept detailed records of crop yields, weather patterns, and soil amendments for this field going back to 1979, he explained, showing Dr. Hernandez a digitized version of Tom's handwritten logs. "This is invaluable," Dr. Hernandez exclaimed, scrolling through the data. "We have a complete agricultural history of the site where the Bradley process originated. It's like having a time machine for soil science." As the morning progressed, more vehicles arrived, representatives from the USDA, environmental scientists from the State University, and even a documentary film crew from National Geographic. Tom's quiet field had become a site of pilgrimage for the agricultural community. During a break in the filming, the documentary director, a young woman named Rachel Kim, approached Tom with a question that had clearly been bothering her. "Mr. Bradley, you've lived with this discovery for decades without knowing its significance. How does it feel to suddenly be recognized as a pioneer?" Tom considered the question while watching a red-tailed hawk circle overhead. "You know, farming teaches you that most important things happen underground, out of sight. Seeds germinate in darkness, roots spread where we can't see them. Maybe recognition is like harvest. It comes in its own time, not when we expect it." The film crew captured his response, adding it to hours of footage that would eventually become part of a documentary series on agricultural innovation. Rachel Kim had convinced her network that Tom's story represented something larger than scientific discovery. It was about the wisdom of patience, observation, and humility in an age of instant gratification. That afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived. James Morrison, CEO of Agritech Global, one of the world's largest agricultural companies, stepped out of a sleek Tesla, looking conspicuously out of place in his $1,000 suit and Italian leather shoes. "Mr. Bradley," he said, extending a manicured hand, "I've flown in from Chicago specifically to meet you. Your discovery has implications for our entire industry." Tom shook the offered hand, noting the softness that spoke of boardrooms rather than barnyards. "Welcome to Willow Creek, Mr. Morrison. Though I should tell you up front, whatever you're selling, I'm not buying." Morrison laughed, a practiced sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Actually, I'm here to buy. Agritech Global would like to acquire the commercial rights to the Bradley process. We're prepared to offer $50 million. The number hung in the air like electricity before a storm. Michael, who had joined them, couldn't hide his shock. Tom, however, remained unmoved. "Look, I appreciate the offer," Tom said evenly, "but the process isn't for sale. The government's already working on making it freely available to farmers worldwide. That's how it should be." Morrison's expression shifted to calculated concern. "Mr. Bradley, with respect, you don't understand the complexities of global agricultural markets. Without proper commercial development, this discovery could destabilize entire economies. Or it could feed hungry people," Tom countered. "Seems like an easy choice to me." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes with Morrison, alternating between financial incentives and veiled warnings about the challenges of implementing new technology without corporate support. Tom remained polite but firm, his lifetime of negotiating with grain buyers serving him well. After Morrison departed, promising to revisit this conversation, Michael turned to his father with amazement. "Dad, you just turned down $50 million. Most people would think you're crazy. Most people haven't spent their lives watching neighbors lose farms to corporate consolidation," Tom replied. "This discovery belongs to the farmers who'll use it, not to shareholders looking for quarterly profits." The exchange with Morrison proved to be a turning point. Word of the attempted buyout spread quickly through agricultural networks, cementing Tom's reputation as a champion of independent farming. Letters and emails poured in from around the world, thanking him for keeping the discovery in the public domain. As November arrived, bringing the first dustings of snow to the Nebraska plains, the Innovation Center began to take shape. The main building combined traditional barn architecture with modern, sustainable design, featuring solar panels that could power the entire facility and living walls that demonstrated vertical farming techniques. Betty Wilson organized a community meeting to discuss how Willow Creek could best adapt to its newfound prominence. The high school gymnasium filled with residents eager to participate in the town's transformation. "We need to think about housing," Betty announced, consulting her ever-present notebook. "The Innovation Center will bring researchers, students, visiting farmers. Where will they stay?" Ideas flew around the room. The old Mitchell Hotel, closed for 15 years, could be renovated. Several families offered to convert spaces into bed and breakfast accommodations. The Methodist Church proposed building dormitory-style housing on their unused backlot. Tom listened with growing amazement as his neighbors embraced change with enthusiasm he hadn't seen in decades. The economic stagnation that had plagued rural America for generations was giving way to possibility and hope. Sheriff Henderson raised a practical concern. "We'll need to expand our emergency services. More people means more potential problems. I've only got 3 deputies for the whole county." "Already in the works," Michael announced, surprising everyone. "I've been in touch with the state. They're providing grants for rural infrastructure improvements. We're also getting fiber optic internet installed throughout the county." The meeting continued past midnight, with committees forming to address everything from zoning changes to cultural events. Tom marveled at how his simple observation had catalyzed not just scientific discovery, but community renewal. The next morning brought an early snowfall, transforming the landscape into a pristine canvas. Tom stood at his kitchen window, coffee in hand, watching construction crews arrive despite the weather. Their dedication reminded him of farmers during planting season. No matter the conditions, the work continued. A knock at the door revealed Sarah Mitchell, now permanently assigned as liaison between Tom and various government agencies. She entered stamping snow from her boots, her professional demeanor warmed by genuine friendship that had developed over the months. "Morning, Tom. I bring news from Washington. The international pilot programs are showing remarkable results. Crop yields in test regions of India are up 42%. The UN wants to fast-track global implementation." Tom gestured for her to sit, pouring her a cup of coffee. "That's faster than anyone expected. Are we ready for that kind of expansion?" "That's why I'm here," Sarah explained. "The president wants to establish an international advisory board, with you as chairman. It would mean regular trips to Washington, possibly some international travel." The request would have seemed absurd just months ago. Now Tom found himself seriously considering it. "What about the farm? I can't abandon it completely." "Michael could manage day-to-day operations," Sarah suggested, "and the position would be part-time. We need your practical perspective to keep the scientists and politicians grounded." Before Tom could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed an international number he didn't recognize. Sarah smiled knowingly as he answered. "Mr. Bradley, this is Dr. Elena Kowalski from the World Food Program. I'm calling from Rome. We'd like to discuss implementing the Bradley process in our African agricultural development programs." The conversation that followed opened Tom's eyes to the global impact of his discovery. Dr. Kowalski described regions where traditional farming was failing due to soil degradation, where the Bradley process could mean the difference between sustenance and starvation. After the call, Tom stood silently for a long moment, overwhelmed by the responsibility. Sarah waited patiently, understanding the weight of the moment. "My grandfather used to say that farmers feed the world," Tom finally said. "I thought he meant it literally. We grow the food people eat. But maybe he meant something bigger. Maybe he meant we have a responsibility to share what we learn from the land." "So you'll accept the position?" Sarah asked hopefully. Tom nodded slowly. "On one condition. Every recommendation we make has to be tested by actual farmers first. No implementing anything that hasn't been proven in real fields by real people." Sarah's smile widened. "The president anticipated you'd say something like that. He's already approved a farmer advisory panel for every regional implementation." The winter months brought a whirlwind of activity. Tom divided his time between the farm and Washington, learning to navigate the complexities of international agricultural policy while maintaining his connection to the land. Michael stepped up to manage daily operations, proving to have inherited more of his father's farming instincts than either had realized. The Innovation Center's construction proceeded through the harsh Nebraska winter, with workers battling snow and freezing temperatures to stay on schedule. The main building was enclosed by Christmas, allowing interior work to continue despite the weather. On Christmas Eve, Tom hosted dinner for the growing team involved in the project. Scientists, government officials, and construction workers mingled with local farmers in his dining room, sharing stories and building connections that transcended professional boundaries. Dr. Hernandez raised her glass in a toast to Tom Bradley, who reminds us that the most profound discoveries often come from simply paying attention. As glasses clinked and conversation flowed, Tom felt Grace's presence more strongly than he had since her death. She would have loved this gathering, this bringing together of different worlds in service of a common goal. Later that evening, after the guests had departed, Tom and Michael sat by the fireplace, Duke snoring contentedly at their feet. The Christmas tree, decorated with ornaments collected over decades, cast a warm glow over the room. "Mom would be proud," Michael said quietly, voicing what Tom had been thinking. "She always believed the farm was meant for more than just our family," Tom replied. "I think she saw this coming somehow." Michael pulled out his laptop, showing Tom the latest designs for the digital platform they were developing. "We've got over 10,000 farmers signed up already. They're sharing observations, solutions, innovations. It's becoming a global community. The platform, officially named the Global Agricultural Knowledge Exchange, GAIC, had been Michael's brainchild. It combined traditional farming wisdom with modern technology, allowing farmers worldwide to contribute to a growing database of agricultural knowledge. "Look at this," Michael continued, pointing to a post from a farmer in Kenya. "He's adapted your water conservation techniques to work with local conditions. Claims it saved his maize crop during the last drought." Tom studied the screen, marveling at how his experiences were being translated and transformed across cultures and continents. "This is what I hoped for," he said, "not just sharing the discovery, but creating a network where every farmer's knowledge matters." The new year arrived with ambitious goals and expanding horizons. The Innovation Center was scheduled to open in spring, with the first class of agricultural students already accepted. Applications had poured in from around the world, with full scholarships available for farmers from developing nations. In February, Tom made his first international trip as chairman of the advisory board. The destination was Senegal, where the Bradley process was being tested in areas suffering from severe soil degradation. The journey marked Tom's first time leaving North America, a fact that amused the seasoned diplomats accompanying him. Standing in a Senegalese field, surrounded by local farmers eager to learn, Tom felt a profound connection to the universal language of agriculture. Through translators, he shared his experiences, but more importantly, he listened to theirs. Each farmer had unique insights born from their specific environment and challenges. "The soil speaks differently here," observed Musa, a third-generation farmer whose land had been failing until the test program began showing results. "But hunger sounds the same everywhere." The simple truth resonated with Tom. He spent hours walking the fields with local farmers, learning about their traditional practices and discussing how the Bradley process could be adapted to their needs. The experience reinforced his belief that successful agricultural innovation required respecting local knowledge. Upon returning to Nebraska, Tom found the Innovation Center nearing completion. The facility included state-of-the-art laboratories, climate-controlled greenhouses, and classrooms equipped with advanced technology. But Tom was most proud of the traditional demonstration plots, where students would learn hands-on farming techniques alongside scientific methods. The opening ceremony was scheduled for May 15th, with dignitaries from around the world planning to attend. As the date approached, Willow Creek transformed itself once again. Fresh paint brightened Main Street buildings. The Historical Society created a walking tour of significant sites, and the community garden expanded to showcase sustainable farming techniques. 3 days before the opening, Tom received an unexpected call from the Nobel Committee. They were considering the Bradley process for the Peace Prize, recognizing its potential to prevent conflicts over food resources. The possibility left Tom speechless. "It's not just about the science," the committee representative explained. "It's about the model you've created for sharing knowledge freely, for putting global welfare above personal profit. In a world of increasing resource competition, that's a powerful example." That evening, Tom walked his fields as he had countless times before. The spring wheat was emerging, tender green shoots pushing through the soil in neat rows. He knelt, running soil through his fingers, feeling its texture and moisture, content as his grandfather had taught him. A car approached on the gravel drive, and Tom recognized Betty Wilson's ancient pickup. She parked and walked out to join him, carrying a thermos of coffee and 2 cups. "Thought you might need this," she said, pouring him a cup. "Big day coming up. How are you holding up?" Tom accepted the coffee gratefully. "Sometimes I feel like I'm living in someone else's life. Nobel Prize discussions, international travel, meetings with presidents. 3 months ago, my biggest concern was getting the harvest in before the first frost. Betty nodded sympathetically. Change is hard, even when it's good change. But Tom, you haven't changed. That's what makes this work. You're still the same. Man who helps neighbors without being asked, who respects the land, who puts community first. Her words carried the wisdom of someone who had known him for decades. Tom felt gratitude for friends like Betty, who kept him grounded as his world expanded beyond anything he could have imagined. The day before the opening, a final surprise awaited. A motorcade arrived carrying not just the president, but several foreign heads of state who had requested to attend the ceremony. The Secretary General of the United Nations had also made the journey to Willow Creek. That evening, a private dinner was held at the Bradley farmhouse. World leaders sat around Tom's kitchen table, eating Betty Wilson's pot roast and discussing the future of global agriculture. The surreal nature of the scene was not lost on Tom, who remembered countless solitary meals at this same table. Mr. Bradley, the UN Secretary General said, "What you've accomplished here transcends agriculture. You've shown how local wisdom can address global challenges, how sharing knowledge freely can benefit all humanity. This is the model we need for addressing climate change, poverty, inequality." Tom looked around the table at faces he'd only seen on television, now gathered in his kitchen like neighbors at a church supper. "I appreciate the kind words," he replied, "but I didn't accomplish anything alone. Every farmer who's ever shared a tip with a neighbor, every scientist who's published their research, every person who's chosen collaboration over competition, they're all part of this." The president nodded approvingly. "That's exactly why this matters. In an era of division, you've created something that brings people together. Tomorrow's ceremony isn't just about opening a building, it's about launching a movement." Later, after the dignitaries had departed to their accommodations, Tom sat alone on his porch. The stars were brilliant in the clear Nebraska sky. The same stars that had watched over generations of farmers working this land. Tomorrow would bring speeches, ribbons, and ceremony. But tonight, in the quiet darkness, Tom felt the deep satisfaction of a farmer who had planted well and was beginning to see the harvest. The opening ceremony exceeded all expectations. Thousands of people gathered on the Innovation Center grounds, with millions more watching via live stream. The facility itself was impressive, a blend of cutting-edge technology and practical design that honored agricultural heritage while embracing the future. Tom's speech was characteristically brief and direct. Standing before the crowd, with world leaders seated behind him, he spoke from the heart. "Folks, I'm not much for speeches. I'm a farmer who noticed something odd in his soil and was fortunate enough to have people who listened. What we're opening today isn't just a building or a research center. It's a promise that we'll keep listening to the land and to each other. My grandfather told me that farming is an act of faith. You put seeds in the ground trusting they'll grow, even though you can't see what's happening beneath the surface. This innovation center is like that seed. We're planting it today, trusting it will grow into something that feeds not just bodies, but minds and spirits too. To every farmer out there who's ever wondered if anyone cares about the work you do, if your knowledge matters, this place is proof that it does. Your observations, your innovations, your daily dedication to feeding the world, all of it matters more than you know." The applause that followed lasted several minutes. As Tom cut the ceremonial ribbon, flanked by the president and the UN Secretary General, cameras captured a moment that would appear in history books. A simple farmer opening the door to a new era of agricultural cooperation. The first weeks after the opening were a blur of activity. researchers moved into their laboratories, students arrived for summer programs, and farmers from around the world came to share their knowledge and learn new techniques. The Innovation Center quickly became what Tom had envisioned, a living bridge between traditional wisdom and modern science. Michael's digital platform experienced exponential growth, with farmers from over 100 countries contributing observations and solutions. The real-time exchange of information was already preventing crop failures and improving yields in regions that had struggled for decades. One afternoon in early June, Tom was giving a tour to a group of agricultural students from Nigeria when Dr. Hernandez rushed out of the main laboratory, excitement evident on her face. "Tom, we've made another breakthrough. The soil analysis revealed a secondary process we hadn't identified before. It appears to enhance nitrogen fixation in legumes. This could reduce the need for synthetic fertilizers by up to 60%. The students gathered around as Dr. Hernandez explained the discovery, their questions reflecting both scientific curiosity and practical farming concerns. Tom watched with satisfaction as the next generation of agricultural leaders engaged with both the wonder of discovery and its real-world applications. As summer progressed, Willow Creek adapted to its new reality. The renovated Mitchell Hotel bustled with visiting researchers and farmers. 3 new restaurants opened to accommodate the influx of visitors. The local school expanded its agricultural science program, with Innovation Center staff teaching specialized courses. Betty Wilson, now managing the town's new visitor center, reported that tourism had increased by 400%. Who would have thought people would come from around the world to visit Willow Creek, she marveled. Though I suppose we're not just a farming town anymore. We're an idea that grew into something bigger. The transformation extended beyond physical changes. Young people who had left for cities were returning, drawn by new opportunities. The population, which had declined for decades, was growing. For the first time in 50 years, empty storefronts filled with new businesses, and the community's spirit shifted from resignation to optimism. In August, Tom received word that he had indeed been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, along with Dr. Hernandez and the international team that had developed the Bradley process applications. The committee cited their work in preventing resource conflicts and promoting global cooperation. When reporters asked for his reaction, Tom's response was characteristic. "It's an honor, of course. But the real prize is seeing farmers around the world using these methods to feed their communities. Awards sit on shelves. Full stomachs change lives." The Nobel ceremony in December marked a full year since the storm that had brought Sarah Mitchell to Tom's door. As he stood on the stage in Stockholm, accepting the medal from the King of Sweden, Tom thought about the interconnectedness of all things. How a single observation could ripple outward, affecting lives across continents and generations. In his acceptance speech, Tom spoke about the wisdom of patience and observation. We live in an age of instant gratification, where we expect immediate answers to complex problems. But the land teaches us differently. Seeds take time to germinate. Soil builds over centuries. The most important changes often happen slowly, beneath the surface, invisible until they transform everything. This prize belongs to every farmer who has ever knelt in a field, wondering why one section grows differently than another. It belongs to every scientist who listens to those farmers. It belongs to every person who believes that sharing knowledge is more powerful than hoarding it. My grandfather said that the best fertilizer is the farmer's footsteps. He meant that attention, care, and presence matter more than any chemical input. As we face global challenges, climate change, food security, inequality, maybe the solution isn't always new technology. Maybe sometimes it's as simple as paying attention, sharing what we learn, and trusting that small observations can grow into world-changing discoveries. Returning to Willow Creek after the ceremony, Tom found the town decorated with banners, celebrating their Nobel laureate. But what touched him most was the simple sign in front of the Innovation Center. "Welcome home, Tom. The soil missed you." As he pulled into his driveway, Duke ambled out to greet him, tail wagging despite his advancing years. Michael emerged from the house, grinning broadly. "Welcome back, Dad. Ready to get back to work? We've got 30 agricultural ministers coming next week to discuss implementing the process in their countries." Tom laughed, climbing out of the truck. "Just let me check on the winter wheat first. Nobel Prize or not, the crop still needs tending." That evening, as Tom walked his fields in the fading light, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The Innovation Center glowed in the distance, its solar panels catching the last rays of sun. Cars passed on the county. A road, researchers heading home, students going to evening classes, farmers arriving for night workshops. His phone buzzed with messages from around the world, updates on pilot programs, questions about soil composition, invitations to speak at conferences. The boy who had grown up on this farm, who had lost his parents young, who had buried his wife and watched his son leave for the city, had somehow become a global figure. Yet standing here, soil beneath his boots, Tom felt unchanged in the ways that mattered most. The phone rang, displaying an international number. It was Musa from Senegal, calling with news that their harvest had exceeded all projections. Through the connection, Tom could hear celebration in the background, drums, singing, laughter. "Mr. Tom," Musa said, his voice thick with emotion. "My grandfather just saw his first full harvest in 20 years. He's 92. He asked me to call you to thank the American farmer who helped heal our land." After the call, Tom sat on his porch steps, Duke beside him, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. A pickup truck turned into his drive. Betty Wilson, with her evening check-in, a ritual she'd maintained since Grace's death. "Saw your light on," she said, joining him on the steps. "Thought you might need company readjusting to us simple folks after hobnobbing with royalty." Tom smiled at his oldest friend. "You know what the King of Sweden asked me? He wanted to know about crop rotation. Turns out his family has a farm. We talked soil composition for 20 minutes while everyone waited for dinner." Betty laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet fields. "Grace always said you could make farming interesting to anyone. Guess she was right about that too." They sat in comfortable silence, watching fireflies dance above the alfalfa field. In the distance, a train whistle sounded. The same lonesome call that had echoed across these plains for generations. Some things remained constant, even as the world transformed around them. "Betty," Tom said finally, "did you ever imagine any of this when we were kids, riding bikes down these country roads?" "Can't say I did," she replied. "But you know what? I'm not surprised it was you. Even back then, you noticed things others missed. Remember when you figured out why the Hendersons' well kept going dry? You were 12. Tom had forgotten that incident, tracing the problem to a shifted underground stream everyone else had overlooked. Perhaps the seeds of discovery had always been there, waiting for the right conditions to grow. As if reading his thoughts, Betty added, "Grace used to say you had a gift for listening to what the land was trying to tell us. Guess the whole world's learning to listen now." After Betty left, Tom made his final rounds of the evening. The Innovation Center had brought changes beyond anything he could have imagined, but the rhythm of farm life continued. Livestock needed tending, equipment required maintenance, and the soil demanded respect regardless of Nobel Prizes or international acclaim. Walking back to the house, Tom paused at the spot where he'd first noticed the unusual mineral deposits decades ago. In the moonlight, the field looked like any other, yet this ordinary piece of ground had yielded secrets that were transforming agriculture across the globe. Inside, Tom opened his laptop to update the farmer's journal he'd been keeping. The simple blog had evolved into a multilingual platform reaching millions, but he still wrote each entry as if talking to a neighbor over the fence line. Day 847 of the new harvest, he typed. Got back from Stockholm today. The winter wheat showing good color despite the early cold snap. Might need to adjust the planting date next year if these weather patterns continue. Musa called from Senegal. Their harvest exceeded projections by 50%. Amazing what happens when farmers share knowledge across continents. Thinking tonight about grandfather's saying, "The land remembers those who tend it well." Maybe that's what this has all been about. Not just the science or the innovation center or even the global impact. Maybe it's about remembering that we're all tending the same earth, that wisdom shared multiplies rather than divides. Tomorrow, Michael and I start planning the spring rotation. Some things don't change, Nobel Prize or not. The sun will rise, the seasons will turn, and farmers will keep faith with the land. Everything else, the awards, the recognition, the transformation of our little town, that's just harvest from seeds planted long ago by folks who believed in paying attention and sharing what they learned. Tom saved the entry and closed the laptop. Outside, an owl called from the old oak tree, the same species that had hunted these fields when his great-grandfather first broke sod. Duke shifted in his sleep, chasing rabbits in his dreams. The house settled with familiar creaks, a lullaby of wood and memory. As he climbed the stairs to bed, Tom felt the deep satisfaction of a day's work completed and tomorrow's possibilities waiting. The Innovation Center stood as testament to what could grow from simple observation and generous spirit. But here, in the quiet of his farmhouse, Tom remained what he had always been, a farmer who listened to the land and acted on what he heard. The last thought before sleep was of Grace, and how she would have loved seeing their quiet corner of Nebraska become a beacon of hope for farmers worldwide. In his dreams, she stood beside him in the wheat field, pointing out something unusual in the soil, her eyes bright with discovery. "Look closer, Tom," she whispered. "There's always more to see if you're willing to look." And somewhere in fields across the globe, farmers were looking closer, sharing their observations, participating in a revolution that began with one man's willingness to admit he'd noticed something he didn't understand. The Bradley process was changing agriculture, but more importantly, it was changing how humanity approached problems, with humility, cooperation, and faith that solutions often lie in the wisdom of those closest to the earth. The next morning would bring new challenges, new discoveries, and new connections across continents. But for now, Tom Bradley slept peacefully, a farmer at rest between the harvest past and the planting yet to come, secure in the knowledge that sometimes the most profound changes begin with simply paying attention to what has always been there, waiting to be noticed. The morning of the Innovation Center's one-year anniversary dawned with unexpected spring snow, delicate flakes dusting the newly planted demonstration fields like sugar on freshly baked bread. Tom stood at his kitchen window, coffee in hand, marveling at how much had changed since that fateful storm. The center had exceeded every projection, training over 2,000 farmers from 60 countries in its first year alone. Michael entered the kitchen, already dressed for the day's ceremonies. International delegations are arriving at the hotel. The Brazilian minister wants to discuss expanding their pilot program, and the team from Bangladesh has data showing a 47% yield increase using the Bradley process. Tom nodded, still processing the global impact of what had started as a simple observation. "Remember when your biggest concern was convincing me to get a smartphone? Now you're coordinating agricultural policy with half the world's governments." The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Tom's new role had required him to navigate complex political waters, balancing scientific integrity with diplomatic necessity. There had been attempts by various corporations to patent derivatives of the Bradley process, each one fought off through legal battles that established important precedents for keeping agricultural innovations in the public domain. The phone rang as they prepared to leave for the ceremony. It was Dr. Elena Kowalski from Rome, her voice urgent. "Tom, we have a situation. The test plots in Mali are showing unexpected results. The process is working, but we're seeing mineral compositions we've never encountered before. Could be another breakthrough." Tom grabbed a notepad, jotting down details as Dr. Kowalski explained. Even after a year of intensive study, the soil continued to reveal new secrets. Each application of the Bradley process in different environments uncovered variations that expanded their understanding of soil chemistry. "Send me the data," Tom said. "We'll have Dr. Hernandez's team analyze it immediately. If it's what I think it is, we might have found a solution for severely depleted soils." After the call, Michael looked at his father with admiration. "You know, a year ago, you would have said, 'Send me a soil sample.' Now you're asking for digital data sets." "Still prefer getting my hands dirty," Tom replied with a grin. "But I've learned that spreadsheets can tell stories too, if you know how to read them." The anniversary celebration drew crowds that surpassed even the opening ceremony. News crews from around the world had descended on Willow Creek, drawn by what many were calling the most significant agricultural development since the Green Revolution. But this time, Tom noticed, the narrative focused not just on scientific achievement, but on the model of collaborative innovation they had established. Standing backstage before his speech, Tom was approached by a young woman who introduced herself as Maria Santos from São Paulo. "Mr. Bradley," she said, eyes shining with excitement, "I'm starting university next month to study agricultural science because of you. My family has farmed for generations, but you showed us that traditional knowledge and modern science can work together." These interactions had become common, yet each one still moved Tom deeply. The Innovation Center had inspired a new generation of farmers and scientists who saw agriculture not as a conflict between old and new, but as a synthesis of wisdom across time and culture. As Tom took the stage, he looked out at an audience that reflected the center's global reach. Farmers in work clothes sat beside government ministers in suits. Students with laptops shared rows with elders who had traveled from remote villages. The diversity embodied everything the project had become. "1 year ago," Tom began, his voice steady despite the size of the crowd, "we opened this center with a simple premise: that solutions to our biggest challenges often come from paying attention to what's right in front of us. Today, I can tell you that premise has proven more powerful than we imagined." He shared statistics that drew gasps from the audience. Over 100,000 farmers trained through digital platforms, yield increases averaging 35% across test regions, and a documented reduction in agricultural water usage by 23%. But Tom quickly moved beyond numbers to human stories. "Last month, I received a letter from a farmer in Ethiopia named Alem. She wrote that her village, which had faced food insecurity for decades, produced its first surplus harvest in living memory. She didn't thank me or this center. She thanked her grandmother, who had always insisted there was something special about certain plots of land, observations that aligned perfectly with the Bradley process indicators." The speech continued, with examples from around the world, each illustrating how local knowledge, when combined with scientific understanding, created solutions more effective than either approach alone. Tom concluded with a challenge that would define the center's second year. "We've proven that sharing knowledge freely can transform agriculture. Now we need to apply this model to other challenges: climate change, water scarcity, biodiversity, Loss. These problems also require us to bridge traditional wisdom with modern science, to collaborate across borders and disciplines. The Bradley process wasn't just about soil chemistry. It was about changing how we solve problems together. The standing ovation lasted several minutes. As Tom left the stage, he was immediately surrounded by people eager to share their own stories of transformation. A farmer from India described how the process had helped restore land damaged by decades of chemical farming. A researcher from Kenya explained how they were adapting the techniques to combat desertification. During the reception, Tom found himself in conversation with Dr. James Chen, a climate scientist from MIT. "We've been studying the carbon sequestration implications of the Bradley process," Dr. Chen explained excitedly. "The enhanced mineral interactions appear to significantly increase soil's capacity to store carbon. This could be a major tool in fighting climate change." The revelation opened new possibilities that Tom hadn't fully considered. As the day progressed, similar conversations revealed applications ranging from ecosystem restoration to water table management. The Innovation Center was evolving from an agricultural facility into a hub for environmental solutions. That evening, after the formal celebrations had ended, Tom sat with Michael, Betty Wilson, and Sarah Mitchell on his porch. The spring snow had melted, leaving the air crisp and clean. They reviewed the day's events while sharing a bottle of wine Betty had been saving for special occasions. "You know what struck me today?" Sarah mused, swirling her glass thoughtfully. "How many people talked about the cultural change as much as the agricultural impact. The idea that knowledge should be shared freely, that innovation comes from collaboration rather than competition. That might be the real revolution." Michael nodded enthusiastically. "The digital platform statistics support that. The most active users aren't just downloading information. They're contributing their own observations and modifications. It's become a true knowledge ecosystem." Betty, ever practical, brought the conversation back to earth. "That's all well and good, but let's not forget the basics. Tom's still got corn to plant next month, Innovation Center or not." The comment sparked laughter, a reminder that amid global transformation, the fundamental rhythms of farm life continued. Tom appreciated Betty's grounding influence, a tether to the reality that had shaped him. As night settled over the prairie, the conversation turned to future plans. The success of the first year had attracted funding from various sources, including a surprising donation from James Morrison, the Agritech CEO who had tried to buy the process. His company had shifted strategy, becoming a major supporter of open-source agricultural innovation. "He called last week," Tom shared. "Said watching our success made him reconsider his entire business model. They're restructuring to focus on implementing sustainable practices rather than proprietary technologies." The transformation of a corporate giant illustrated the broader impact of their work. The agricultural industry was slowly shifting from a competitive, patent-driven model to one based on collaboration and shared benefit. It wasn't universal. Many companies still resisted, but the momentum was building. Later that night, unable to sleep, Tom walked through the Innovation Center grounds. Security lights illuminated the buildings, but his destination was the Heritage Garden, where heirloom varieties from around the world grew in careful rows. Each plant represented a farming tradition, preserved and studied for insights that might prove crucial as climate patterns shifted. He paused at a section dedicated to drought-resistant varieties from the American Southwest, marveling at crops developed by indigenous farmers centuries before modern science existed. These plants embodied the wisdom he had tried to honor, solutions developed through patient observation over generations. "Couldn't sleep either." Dr. Hernandez's voice startled him. She emerged from the shadows, tablet in hand as always. Too much to process, Tom admitted. Sometimes I need to touch actual soil to make sense of it all. She smiled understandingly. I've been reviewing the Mali data Dr. Kowalski sent. Tom, I think we're on the verge of another breakthrough. The mineral interactions in those depleted soils. They're creating compounds we've never seen before. If we can understand the mechanism, it could help restore millions of acres of degraded farmland. They spent an hour discussing the implications, their conversation ranging from molecular chemistry to practical farming applications. It struck Tom how natural these discussions had become, how far he'd traveled from the farmer who had simply noticed something unusual in his field. The next morning brought a video call that would set the direction for the center's second year. The UN Secretary General appeared on screen alongside representatives from the World Bank and several international development organizations. Mr. Bradley, the Secretary General began, based on the success of the Agricultural Innovation Center, we'd like to propose a network of similar facilities focusing on different aspects of sustainable development. Water management, renewable energy, sustainable construction, all using your model of combining traditional knowledge with modern science. The proposal was staggering in scope. They envisioned innovation centers on every inhabited continent, each adapted to regional challenges while connected through shared principles and digital infrastructure. Tom would serve as senior advisor, helping establish the collaborative framework that had proven so successful in Willow Creek. This is bigger than anything we imagined, Tom said to Michael after the call ended. Are we ready for this? Michael grinned, pulling up architectural renderings on his laptop. Dad, we've been getting ready our whole lives. We just didn't know it. The expansion plans moved quickly. Within months, ground was broken on centers in Costa Rica, Ghana, and Indonesia. Each facility followed the Willow Creek template while adapting to local conditions and needs. Tom traveled extensively, working with communities to ensure each center reflected regional wisdom and priorities. During a visit to the Ghana site, Tom experienced one of his most profound moments of the journey. An elderly farmer named Kwame approached him after a planning meeting, speaking through a translator. My grandfather told stories of soil that it could heal itself, Kwame said. Everyone thought they were just tales. Now you've proven the ancestors' new truths science is only beginning to understand. The comment encapsulated everything Tom had learned about the relationship between traditional knowledge and scientific discovery. Ancient wisdom often contained truths that modern methods could validate and amplify. Back in Willow Creek, the Innovation Center continued to evolve. A new wing focused on climate adaptation strategies, while expanded greenhouse facilities tested crops under various climate scenarios. The digital platform Michael had developed now hosted over 1 million users, creating the world's largest repository of agricultural knowledge. One afternoon, while reviewing expansion plans with the architectural team, Tom received an unexpected visitor. His neighbor, Jim Peterson, who had initially been skeptical of all the changes, stood in the doorway, hat in hand. Tom, Jim began hesitantly, I've been watching what you're doing here. Fought against it at first, thought you were bringing too much change to our quiet town. But my grandson just got accepted to the summer program. First one in our family, headed toward college. I wanted to thank you. The moment reminded Tom that amid global impact, the local transformations remained most meaningful. Willow Creek had become a town of opportunity, where young people saw futures in agriculture and rural development, rather than feeling forced to leave for cities. As the second anniversary approached, Tom faced a decision that would have seemed impossible 2 years earlier. The president had nominated him for Secretary of Agriculture, arguing that his unique combination of practical experience and innovative thinking was exactly what the department needed. I am a farmer, not a politician, Tom protested during a late-night call with the president. "That's exactly why we need you," came the reply. "You've shown that government can facilitate rather than dictate, that policy works best when it grows from the ground up rather than being imposed from above." The decision weighed heavily as Tom walked his fields at sunset. The wheat glowed golden in the slanting light, a sight that had comforted him through every challenge of his life. Duke, now moving even more slowly, stayed close to his side. That evening, Tom convened his informal advisory council. Michael, Betty, Sarah, and Dr. Hernandez to discuss the offer. They gathered in the farmhouse kitchen, the same room where Sarah had first revealed her government connections during that transformative storm. "You have to consider the impact you could have," Sarah urged. "Imagine implementing the Innovation Center model across the entire Department of Agriculture." Betty, predictably, offered a different perspective. "But who'll make sure the Innovation Center stays true to its mission? Who'll keep it grounded in real farming?" Michael surprised everyone with his response. "Dad doesn't have to choose. If he takes the position, I'll manage the center. It's time I stepped fully into this legacy." The conversation continued late into the night, weighing opportunities against responsibilities, ambition against contentment. Finally, Tom made his decision. "I'll take the position on one condition," he announced. "I maintain my farm and spend at least 1 week each month here in Willow Creek. If I'm going to shape agricultural policy, I need to keep dirt under my fingernails." The announcement of Tom's nomination made international news. Editorial pages debated whether a farmer could effectively run a major federal department. Some praised the choice as inspired. Others questioned whether practical experience could substitute for administrative expertise. Tom's confirmation hearings became must-watch television as he answered complex policy questions with straightforward farming metaphors. When asked about his management philosophy, he replied, "Good farming requires observing before acting, adapting to conditions rather than forcing predetermined solutions, and remembering that every decision affects not just this season, but many harvests to come. I'd run the department the same way." The Senate confirmed him unanimously, a rare bipartisan agreement in polarized times. As Tom prepared to take office, the Innovation Center organized a farewell celebration that drew thousands to Willow Creek. Standing once again at the podium where he'd given so many speeches, Tom reflected on the journey from solitary farmer to national figure. 2 years ago, a storm brought an unexpected visitor to my door. That storm hasn't really ended. It transformed into a different kind of weather system, one that's spreading seeds of change across the globe. He paused, looking out at faces representing dozens of countries and countless stories of transformation. "When I move to Washington, I'll carry with me every lesson this land has taught, every insight you've shared, every reminder that wisdom grows in unexpected places. The Department of Agriculture is about to discover what happens when you treat every farmer as a researcher, every field as a laboratory, and every tradition as a potential innovation." The months that followed saw sweeping changes in agricultural policy. Tom implemented programs that prioritized sustainable practices, established regional innovation networks, and created pathways for farmer-led research to influence national decisions. The success of the Bradley process became a template for addressing other agricultural challenges. Meanwhile, in Willow Creek, Michael proved himself a worthy successor. The Innovation Center expanded its influence while maintaining the practical, collaborative approach Tom had established. Betty Wilson joined the board of directors, ensuring the farmer's perspective remained central to every decision. On a crisp autumn morning, exactly 3 years after the storm that changed everything, Tom returned to his farm for his monthly visit. As his government car pulled into the driveway, he saw Duke waiting on the porch, tail wagging despite his Advanced years. Some things, Tom reflected, remained wonderfully constant. Walking through his fields, now part of the Innovation Center's Heritage Preserve, Tom knelt to examine the soil. Even with all his responsibilities, this simple act still grounded him, connected him to the truths that had guided his journey. Michael joined him, carrying tablets full of data from the center's latest research. The Mali breakthrough is revolutionizing desert agriculture, he reported excitedly. And the Indonesia Center just published findings on mangrove restoration that could protect countless coastal communities. Tom smiled, handful of soil running through his fingers. Remember what Grandpa used to say, "Take care of the land, and it'll take care of you." Turns out he was talking about the whole planet. That evening, as Tom prepared to return to Washington, he stood on his porch one last time, looking out over fields that had nurtured 4 generations of Bradleys. The Innovation Center glowed in the distance, its lights like earthbound stars, illuminating paths to sustainable futures. Betty drove up in her pickup, ostensibly to say goodbye, but really to ensure Tom didn't forget his roots amid the corridors of power. "Don't let those city folks change you," she warned, though her smile showed pride in what her old friend had accomplished. "Not much chance of that," Tom assured her. "Every policy meeting I ask myself, would this make sense to Betty, Wilson? If the answer's no, I know we need to rethink it." As the government car carried him back toward Washington, Tom opened his laptop to work on a speech about the department's new direction. But first, he checked the Farmer's Journal platform Michael maintained. Messages from around the world filled his screen. Successes, challenges, innovations, questions. Each one reminded him that transformation begun in Nebraska soil now touched lives across the globe. Day 127 of the new harvest, Tom typed, heading back to DC after checking the home fields. Winter wheats established well, should be a good crop come spring. Amazing to think that 3 years ago, my biggest concern was getting through another season. Now we're helping farmers worldwide, not just survive, but thrive. The real harvest isn't just bigger yields or better soil, it's the connections we've built, the knowledge we've shared, the hope we've planted. Every farmer who learns from another, every scientist who listens to traditional wisdom, every community that chooses collaboration over competition, they're all part of this crop we're growing together. Grace always said the farm would teach us everything we needed to know about life. Turns out she was right about that too. You plant carefully, tend faithfully, share generously, and trust that good soil will yield good fruit. Whether you're farming 40 acres or shaping policy for a nation, the principles hold true. Tomorrow brings more meetings, more decisions, more opportunities to apply farm wisdom to federal policy. But tonight, I'm just grateful. For soil that speaks to those who listen, for storms that bring unexpected blessings, and for the reminder that sometimes the biggest changes start with simply paying attention to what's right beneath our feet. Tom closed the laptop as Washington's lights appeared on the horizon. Behind him, the Nebraska plains stretched endlessly under star-filled skies. Ahead lay challenges and opportunities he could never have imagined during all those solitary years after Grace's death. The storm that had brought transformation was now a gentle breeze, carrying seeds of change to every corner of the earth. And Tom Bradley, farmer from Willow Creek, continued his unlikely journey, grounded in soil, elevated by purpose, connected to a global community growing solutions for a hungry world. In fields across the planet, farmers knelt to examine their soil. Scientists shared discoveries freely, and communities chose collaboration over competition. The Bradley process had become more than agricultural innovation. It was a movement that proved wisdom, multiplied when shared, that attention paired with action could transform the world. and that sometimes the most profound revolutions begin with someone simply noticing what others had overlooked. The future stretched ahead like freshly tilled soil, ready for planting, full of potential, waiting for careful tending, and Tom Bradley, Secretary of Agriculture, farmer at heart, was ready for whatever the next season might bring. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.